Welcome to Twists of Life, where every story has an unexpected turn. Stories of joy and sorrow, hope and redemption, just like the life we all live. Make yourself comfortable. It's time to begin. The frost intensified, and each step on the snow echoed with a resonant crunch underfoot. Overhead, large, unusually bright stars shone. George hurried towards his house. His face burned from the cold, and the chill penetrated deep into his body. Despite his thick padded jacket, only his feet, clad in warm felt boots, felt comfortable. The man was returning from an old friend's place. He and Peter had been inseparable since their youngest years. Life presented all sorts of surprises, but Peter was invariably there in difficult moments, offering support, helping however he could. Most often in silence, because Peter, it had to be admitted, was not a master of eloquence. However, in most situations, words weren't even needed. Peter was one of the few who kept George in his native Alexandrovka. Although his grown children, long and firmly settled in the city, often urged their father to move in with them. "Well, think about how much easier it would be for you there," his daughter Eleanor urged. "All the city conveniences in an apartment, no need to toil over a garden. Your pension is decent, enough for utilities and all sorts of entertainment. You can go to the cinema, the theater." "Where would I go from my native nest?" George persisted. "What about this house?" his son William chimed in. "What's in it? Old, leaning, always patching the roof, or fixing the fence, or something else. So much trouble with it. But in an apartment, bliss, you'll live happily ever after." "A stone cage," George objected. "And what would I do there? You're at work from morning till night, and I'll sit all alone, like an owl?" "We'll visit you more often," Eleanor offered her argument. "Otherwise you live 150 kilometers away. It's not easy to travel." George merely sighed heavily and shook his head negatively. No, he wouldn't leave Alexandrovka for anywhere. It was difficult to explain this to his children. They were so modern, so pragmatic. There was, of course, some truth in their words, but how could he part with the house that had become a part of him? He remembered how his grandfather and father had built this house, helped by friends and relatives. Indeed, all of Alexandrovka had taken part, for the day before, the grandfather's old dwelling had burned to the ground. It had been struck by lightning. The new house turned out no worse, solid, sturdy, smelling of resin and fresh wood. And then, many years later, when young George decided to marry after military service, his grandfather passed the house on to his only grandson. He himself moved in with his son. George still remembered his grandfather's words. "A man must bring his wife into his own home. A wife should be behind her husband as if behind a stone wall. Then you will have happiness." And George tried with all his might, so that Helen would feel safe beside him, wouldn't worry about problems, but simply enjoy a happy family life. Helen. He met her when she was still quite a child. A sweet-faced girl with serious blue eyes and two thin braids, tanned, in a light pink sundress and worn dusty sandals, and with a thick book tucked under her arm. That was how George first saw his future wife. Only then, of course, he didn't even suspect that this was his destiny. George himself was only about 10 or 11 years old at the time. He and Peter and a few other village boys were just heading towards the pond. A fishing rod on his shoulder, a light bucket in his hand, trousers rolled up to his knees, a stretched-out t-shirt. A whole summer lay ahead. The holidays had just begun. Friends were nearby. George was in high spirits, feeling light and carefree. And then there she was, standing by the fence near Grandma Nancy's house and thoughtfully watching a cat with kittens. A newcomer. George had never seen this girl in Alexandrovka before, and something about her captivated him even then. Something made him stop to get a better look at the slender figure. The other boys didn't pay attention to the stranger. They just walked past as if nothing had happened. But George, even then, he felt that this girl was not just a random passerby on his path. "Well, what are you doing?" Peter turned to his friend. "What are you frozen for? Let's go." At that moment, the girl raised her huge blue eyes to George. It was as if he had been struck by lightning from head to toe. The boy, surprised at himself, blushed to the roots of his hair. "I'm coming! I'm coming!" he shouted to Peter and rushed to catch up with his friends. Later he learned that the girl's name was Helen, and that she would now live with Grandma Nancy because something terrible had happened to her parents, and they were gone. Opinions differed here. Some boys claimed they had run away, abandoning their daughter. Others spoke of a terrible tragedy. Still others told stories of how Helen's parents got lost in the forest. Later it turned out that the girl's mother and father had died in a car crash. They were driving to the city in a passing car. The driver lost control on a slippery road, and Helen was sent to live in the neighboring village with her only relative, Grandma Nancy. Learning what had happened, George felt pity for the girl. It was terrifying for him to even imagine back then. How could it be, just like that, overnight, to lose both mom and dad? After the boy was told about Helen's fate, he wanted to protect her. To protect and to make her happy. But the boy had no idea how to approach the girl. Seeing her from afar, he was happy about the pleasant encounter and felt very shy. And generally, George had never been good at talking to girls. They seemed to him to be mean and haughty creatures. But Helen was definitely different. The boy felt it. Helen spoke to him herself. This happened at the end of summer. George had climbed a tree then to rescue silly Fluffy. The little neighbor's kitten was always getting into scrapes. This time, he had been scared by dogs, climbed a tall oak tree, and couldn't get down. He sat at the top and wailed in a thin voice for everyone around to hear. How could he just walk past? George, of course, climbed up to rescue the hapless Fluffy. He scratched his chest and stomach on the rough bark, but he saved the animal. "You're good at climbing trees," the boy heard a quiet voice behind him. He turned and met the approving gaze of huge blue eyes. It was her, Helen. "It's nothing special." The boy was again overcome with shyness. "How cute." Helen's attention shifted to Fluffy. "Can I hold him?" "Of course." George held out the kitten to the girl. She began to gently stroke the animal's gray fur, calling him various affectionate names. And somehow, without noticing, they started talking. George no longer remembered about what. It seems they first talked about cats, then moved on to dogs. Afterwards, Ellie told him about her life with her parents there, in a faraway large village. The girl missed her mom and dad, and also her old friends, her school. There was so much longing in her voice and eyes. George immediately promised to introduce Helen to the boys and girls of Alexandrovka. He assured her that they also had good, cheerful people living here, just so he wouldn't see that sadness. If only he could make Helen smile. And George kept his promise. Very soon, the girl became part of their cheerful, noisy group, and she went with the Alexandrovka children to the river and the forest, played football and Cossacks and robbers, sat by the evening campfire outside the village. Helen turned out to be a very quiet and thoughtful girl, and also smart and curious. She knew so much, noticed so much. George openly admired the beautiful girl. Then, at 10 years old, he still, of course, didn't understand what was happening to him. He couldn't even guess that it was love, and for life. Summer flew by unnoticed. The school year began. Helen became George's and Peter's classmate. Time passed. School friendship gradually grew into mutual love. After the ninth grade, George enrolled in a technical school to become a mechanic. Helen, the eternal straight-A student, became a student at a medical college. George and Helen were officially dating by then, going on real dates, going to the city for walks, kissing. Nobody was surprised. The couple formed somehow very naturally, as if it couldn't have been otherwise. And then George went into the army. And Helen waited for him for 2 whole years. She wrote letters, even came to visit her beloved a few times. In the army, George finally grew up. Returning, he immediately proposed to Helen. She, of course, gladly accepted. That's when the grandfather gave the young couple this house. The house where George was now facing his old age. Unfortunately, alone. How he missed Helen. Every day. Every moment. Sometimes it seemed that she would come out of the kitchen any minute. Rosy-cheeked, cheerful, smelling of something delicious, she would smile and ask, "How are you?" But that would never happen. George and Helen lived, as they say, soul to soul. They cared for each other. They were happy together. Sometimes George felt that he understood his wife without words. And she, him. The newlyweds didn't delay having children. A year after the wedding, they were already nursing their firstborn, William. A couple of years later, a daughter also appeared in the family, the charming little laugher Eleanor, who looked very much like her mother. George worked on the local collective farm, earned well, enough to live on. Helen worked part-time as a nurse in the village clinic. The children brought joy. Both did well in school, helped the adults with chores, and obeyed their father and mother in everything. Only one thing clouded George's family happiness. During Helen's second pregnancy, when the happy couple was expecting Eleanor, it turned out that the woman had a heart defect. Whether it was congenital or acquired was hard to tell. And it seemed this ailment hadn't bothered Helen before, but giving birth to 2 children one after another aggravated the illness. After their daughter was born, Helen started having periodic attacks. She would suddenly turn pale, her lips would turn blue, and the woman would clutch her heart. At such moments, George was gripped by icy fear. He could protect his beloved from anything, a rabid dog, an evil person, the elements, but not from an insidious illness. George and Helen had initially dreamed of a large family. They weren't planning to stop at 2 children. But the doctor said that Helen could no longer become a mother. It was dangerous for her life. Helen constantly took pills and periodically went to the hospital. Gradually, George got used to this, got used to the fact that the illness was under control, and even almost stopped fearing for his beloved wife. The children grew up. First, the son left to study in the city. He enrolled in the economics faculty of a prestigious university. By himself, without connections, without money. George and Helen were very proud of their eldest child then. But they also worried about him. How would he manage alone in the city, without them? What if he dropped out of school, got involved with bad company? But William didn't let them down. He studied excellently and also worked part-time. 2 years later, his sister Eleanor followed in her brother's footsteps. She also moved to the city. And George and Helen were left alone in their native home. Yes, it was a golden period of life. George recalled it with nostalgia. The children were already grown, living their own lives, occasionally visiting with lots of impressions and news. Everything was going well for both the son and daughter, even excellently. Both their careers and personal lives were going well. George and Helen were proud of their children and rejoiced for them. And they also enjoyed a quiet, measured life and waited for grandchildren. They went mushroom picking in the forest, went fishing, celebrated holidays with Peter and his wife Mary. Life was good. Then the grandchildren appeared. First, a daughter was born to their son, then a son to their daughter. A new era of family life began for Helen and George. The little ones were brought to their grandparents for the summer, and they happily occupied themselves with the grandchildren. Now they didn't need to work. The happy grandparents could devote all their time and attention to these wonderful little people. Returning from the forest or fishing with the little ones, George could smell the aromas of delicious baking while still in the yard. This was Helen's effort for her loved ones while they were out. The man often thought that this was happiness, and thanked fate for such a gift. For Helen, for the children, for the grandchildren. The grandchildren grew up and visited Alexandrovka less often. It was understandable. They had their own affairs, their own friends. The children of yesterday turned into teenagers. Eleanor and William also didn't spoil their parents with frequent visits. When did they have the time? Work, home, children. Helen and George, of course, missed their loved ones, but they understood them perfectly. Life in the city was like that. The pace was simply frantic. When George and Helen visited their children, they would get tired of this rhythm in a couple of days and happily return to their quiet, cozy Alexandrovka, to their beloved home. And then the illness finally showed itself fully. Helen got worse. Expensive medicines that William had prescribed from somewhere abroad didn't help. Treatment in the best city medical center didn't save her. Helen slowly faded, weakening with each passing day. George saw it, saw everything, understood, but could do nothing. Absolutely nothing. No, he could do something after all. He filled his wife's last days with happiness, light, and joy. Every morning he gave her bouquets of wildflowers, and then, bright autumn leaves. He cooked Helen's favorite dishes, talked with her for hours. They recalled the past, including their carefree, happy childhood. Helen smiled, gently, affectionately. George tried to imprint this smile in his memory in the smallest details. One evening, Helen felt unwell. George called an ambulance. His wife was taken to the city hospital. George held his beloved's hand until she was taken to the ward on a gurney. The man never saw his wife alive again. The doctors did everything they could, but it didn't work out. George grieved heavily. Everything around lost its meaning. Colors faded. Sounds became somehow muffled, as if coming through a layer of water. The children stayed with their inconsolable father for a little while, and then fluttered off into their own lives. It was probably for the best. Affairs and worries distract from grief, help get through difficult days. Peter remained with George, faithful Peter. He came every day, sat beside him, silently, as always. The friends smoked on the porch, sometimes discussed the news or the weather. Peter's wife, Mary, also often appeared, always bringing something tasty. Pies, goulash, even dumplings. All the things George usually liked. The man appreciated the care of his loved ones. He knew that they also longed for Helen. All four had known each other since childhood, and over the years in Alexandrovka had become like family. Gradually, life returned to its usual course. George somehow adapted to the new reality, learned to exist without Helen. Although, why without Helen? His wife was always present in his thoughts. He talked to her before going to bed, shared his sorrows and joys. Mentally, of course. These silent dialogues made the man feel lighter, warmer somehow. The children urged their lonely father to move to the city, closer to them. The money George and Helen had saved would be quite enough for a cozy one-room apartment. Life in the city, according to William and Eleanor, would be easier and more pleasant. And they, the children and grandchildren, were nearby. They could see each other more often. But George just couldn't leave his house, where every corner reminded him of happy years. And the landscapes of Alexandrovka? And the forest, with which the man had become so close over the years? And his favorite spot by the river, where he went fishing, and where he could think so well? And Peter and Mary? Finally, Silent Peter, who had become a brother to George. No, the man could not leave Alexandrovka. This was his place. But how could he explain this to his children? They presented logical arguments that were difficult to dispute. George had almost reached his gate. His house stood at the edge of the street. Beyond the fence, the snowy highway immediately opened up to view, along which cars now passed only very rarely. Further on stretched a wide field, and behind it rose the forest like a wall, the very forest where George loved to spend time. It was already late and cold. The frost seemed to be strengthening. Tomorrow, perhaps, even school classes would be canceled. Wide, straight columns of smoke rose into the sky from the chimneys. Life was bustling in these houses. Wives were preparing dinner. Children were doing homework. It was cheerful, warm, bright, cozy. And George? Empty rooms awaited him. Warm ones, though. Before going out, the man had thoroughly heated the house. It was quite bright. Although there had never been lampposts on George's street, they were mainly in the central part of Alexandrovka. But the light of the full moon, which had rolled into the sky, was quite enough. George habitually surveyed the surroundings. That's when he noticed her in the distance, a small, thin, hunched figure of a person. Someone was trudging along the roadside, slowly, barely moving their feet, either from exhaustion, or perhaps this person was injured or drunk. In any case, the person clearly needed help. It was dangerous to stay outside in such frost. George hurried after the solitary figure trudging along. For his age, he was in excellent shape and didn't complain about his strength, and he could still run very fast. Daily hours-long walks in the fresh air and physical labor, you couldn't deny it, were very hardening. This person was clearly not from Alexandrovka, because they were moving away from the village, trudging right along the highway towards the city. Were they really planning to get there on foot in such frost? George sped up. The figure kept getting closer and closer. Now only a few dozen meters remained to the person. George had become nearsighted in his old age, but from this distance, he could already distinguish that a young woman was trudging along the road, sinking into the deep snow. She looked slightly older than George's granddaughter, about 20, maybe even less. Thin, somehow frightened, in a long, fashionable, but clearly unsuitable puffer coat for such weather, and in light boots with a low heel that looked utterly ridiculous outside the city. The girl was huddled miserably in a scarf wrapped several times around her neck. Her hands were bare, without gloves or mittens. Her thin fingers were completely numb. "Wait!" George called out to the stranger. The girl turned around. She was pretty, with large brown eyes and a scattering of freckles on a slightly upturned nose. Short chestnut curls peeked out from under her knitted hat. The girl flinched in surprise, clearly not expecting to meet anyone on the deserted road. Then fear appeared in her eyes. George understood. If the girl could have done it, she would have immediately bolted, run away. But the stranger was clearly already exhausted. She could barely move her feet. "Don't be afraid of me. I won't do anything to you," George tried to speak as gently as possible. "You need to get warm. The frost is getting stronger. The nearest village is 25 kilometers away. You'll freeze." The girl stopped. She understood that George was right, but seemed to see no other way out. The stranger looked utterly desperate. "Did something happen?" George asked sympathetically. He knew that letting this girl go was equivalent to abandoning someone to certain death. "Yes," the stranger finally said. Her voice trembled. The girl was clearly holding back tears. Do you need help?" "Yes," the girl nodded again. It seemed she was afraid to say anything more than this short "yes," because then she wouldn't be able to hold back the tears anymore. "That's good then. Let's go to my place now. You need to warm up quickly. Your cheeks are completely frozen already." We'll figure out how to help you there." The girl hesitated. It was understandable. Going into the house of a stranger met at night on a deserted highway was a risky decision. But she had no other way out, and the stranger nodded briefly in agreement. "That's great. My house. It's very close. Look, there it is, standing by the road." George spoke in a calm, ordinary tone, trying to reassure the young lady a little. The stranger walked a little behind George and looked around fearfully. Her whole body was tense. She was ready to run away at the slightest sign of danger. In the yard, old Buddy ran up to George, wagging his tail. The dog who had been the house's guard for almost 15 years. Loyal, smart, kind. He sniffed the guest and gave a friendly bark, as if inviting her in. The girl smiled, petted the dog's head, and the tension that had gripped her seemed to ease a little. George was glad about this change. Maybe the stranger would finally speak and tell him what had happened to her. It was clearly some dark story. It was warm in the house. George turned on the light, led his guest to the kitchen, and sat her closer to the still hot stove. The girl needed to warm up, after all. She had spent so much time in the cold. The stranger was clearly enjoying the warmth and coziness of the village house. She took off her hat and scarf, but she wasn't in a hurry to unbutton her coat. She hadn't warmed up yet. George put on the kettle. He kept talking about something so that an awkward silence wouldn't hang in the air. "I'll brew some mint tea now. You'll warm up from the inside and calm your nerves a bit." "Thank you," the girl mumbled. "Thank you for not leaving me there." "Well, how else could I?" George wondered. "It happens differently. While I was walking on the highway there, several cars drove towards the city. I waved my hands at them, but no one stopped. It must have been scary, probably, a person on a deserted road, somehow suspicious. Not so much suspicious, but strange. That's for sure," George remarked cautiously. "My name is Vicky," the girl suddenly introduced herself. "And I'm George Miller. Or just George, whatever you prefer." "That's what my grandpa was called," the girl smiled faintly, taking the mug with the steaming, fragrant drink from George's hands. "He was the only one who cared about me. It's a shame he died young." There was so much grief, so much longing in these words, that George's heart ached. "I'm sure you're mistaken. You have a mom and dad, right? Do you really think you're indifferent even to them?" "Of course," Vicky replied confidently. "They don't have time for me. My father left the family when I was 12. He fell in love, decided to start a new life. And voila. Now I have 3 younger sisters. And Mom. I just get in her way. She dates sometimes, but she can't bring anyone home. Because I'm there. I get in everyone's way." With these words, Vicky took off her puffer coat, and George couldn't help but gasp in surprise. The girl's round belly, stretched by a black sweater, was revealed to his eyes. His guest was expecting a child, and judging by the size of her belly, she was quite far along. "Yes, I'm pregnant," Vicky sighed, noticing her host's reaction. "So what? I'm of age if that matters?" "Nothing. That's actually very good. Children are happiness. It's just that now I don't understand anything at all. How did you end up on the highway at night, and in this condition?" "Oh, it's a very long story," the girl sighed. "But we're not really in a hurry. Will you tell me what happened?" "Of course, if you want." Vicky grew up in a poor family. Mother, father, older sister. Her mother worked as a saleswoman in a shop near their home. Her father worked at a factory. There was enough money for the essentials: inexpensive clothes from the market, simple food, utility payments. But there were no funds for travel, or for quality cosmetics, or a fancy phone for their daughter. Everyone around Vicky lived like that, but the TV showed a completely different reality. And the girl dreamed of one day becoming as rich, successful, and beautiful as the heroines of films and TV shows about that colorful world. Vicky's sister, Hope, also strived for success. She studied hard, tried to win Olympiads, dreamed of entering a medical university and becoming a successful sought-after cardiologist. Subsequently, she managed to carry out this plan. But such a path seemed too long and difficult for Vicky. And where was the guarantee that she would succeed? It was possible that all her efforts would go to waste. No, that kind of outcome didn't suit young Vicky. The girl inherited thick chestnut hair and large brown eyes from her father, and a magnificent model figure from her mother. The girl rightly considered her advantageous appearance her ticket in life. For a beautiful young woman, Vicky believed, it wasn't that hard to find a rich man. And then a completely different life would finally begin. The prospects opening up were simply breathtaking. "Study harder," Responsible Hope instructed her younger sister. "Depend on a man your whole life? What's good about that? That's definitely not for me." "But that's perfectly fine for me," Vicky smiled back. "And what's not for me is poring over textbooks for hours like you. I'd rather watch videos on how to apply makeup to highlight my best features." "You don't need to emphasize anything. You're already a beauty." "I know." After 9th grade, Vicky left the school she hated. So that her mother would leave her alone, the girl, for appearance's sake, enrolled in a culinary college. The competition there was the lowest, and it wasn't bad to know how to cook well. After all, everyone knows that the way to a man's heart is through his stomach. Ultimately, the fact of studying at a culinary college played a significant role in Vicky's fate. This happened just before graduation. The girl was interning as a cook's assistant in one of the most popular restaurants in the city. It was Hope who helped her get a place like that. Her older sister had already graduated from university, started working as a doctor in a private clinic, and had acquired good connections. The owner of the restaurant was Julian, a young man from the Armenian diaspora. Tall, athletic, well-built, always stylishly and expensively dressed, impeccably polite to the staff, witty, cheerful, and at the same time very, very handsome. Black eyes, an elegant curve of the lips, noble eyebrows. Julian was twice Vicky's age, but that didn't stop her from falling in love with him. Here he was, the man of her dreams. Rich, handsome, successful. With him, she could go through fire or water. Nothing was scary. But the attentive girl immediately noticed a wedding ring on Julian's finger. Yes, of course, Julian was married. Later, from the restaurant staff, the girl learned that he was also a father of many children. He was raising 3 daughters. For a long time, Vicky only cast loving glances at her idol. Not all of them escaped the eyes of the restaurant staff. The attentive waitress Olivia noticed the impression Julian made on the young intern. "Fallen in love, huh?" she asked directly one day. Vicky was taken aback by the unexpected question and therefore answered as it was. "I think so, yes." "No wonder. Julian is certainly handsome. And you, by the way, are quite his type." "What do you mean?" "It's very simple. He likes them like that. Thin, young, graceful, and wide-eyed." "But Julian is married. When has that ever stopped anyone?" Olivia smirked. "Tell me honestly, aren't you afraid of being a mistress? Because he definitely won't leave his wife and children for you." "I'm not afraid," Vicky replied. At that moment, she truly didn't care, as long as she was near Julian. "Well then, I can arrange a date for you. Julian, he actually asked me himself to talk to you, to test the waters, so to speak. He liked you too." Vicky couldn't believe what she heard. She even felt dizzy. Julian, this prince, this king, her idol, had he really noticed her and even asked Olivia to talk to her? Wow. Of course, Vicky happily agreed to the date. The first meeting took place in some huge country mansion. Everything was mysterious and romantic. Julian sent a car for Vicky. The driver took her out of the city to that very mansion. Luxury. Everything in that place was luxurious. The girl felt as if she had stepped into a movie about the beautiful life, one of those she loved so much. Julian was waiting for Vicky in an arbor decorated with lanterns and flowers, right next to the pool. The stars shone brightly in the sky. And he looked at Vicky with admiration, interest, and smiled. All of this made the girl's head spin. Was what was happening real? Or was it just a dream or fantasy? Doubts vanished when Julian walked up to her and gallantly took her hand. The warmth of his palm. It was definitely real. That evening, so unusual, so romantic, so magical, Vicky completely lost her head. Julian turned out to be even more perfect than he seemed from afar. Smart, sensitive, perceptive. In some incredible way, he guessed all of Vicky's desires and fulfilled them almost instantly. And the way Julian looked at her, that look made the girl feel wonderful, unique. Next to Julian, Vicky felt like a queen. Julian was generous with gifts, expensive jewelry, designer cosmetics, elite perfume. The girl's dreams came true. Vicky now bought clothes in boutiques from famous fashion houses. These clothes, they were strikingly different from everything the girl had worn before. In dresses and jeans from renowned designers, Vicky felt luxurious, irresistible, stunning. The admiration in the eyes of others, and most importantly, in Julian's dark eyes, further convinced the girl that she was beautiful. Julian, he was so gentle with her. The authoritative, rich man treated Vicky like a fragile flower or a crystal vase. It was so pleasant to be near him, to breathe in his scent, to feel the warmth of his hands, to hear his low voice with a slight rasp, to see his smile, a kind, charming, warm smile. They usually met at that same mansion. As Vicky understood, it was one of Julian's country houses for recreation. There were many spacious, stylishly furnished rooms, a large gym, a mini cinema, and a pool. Even two pools, one in the yard, the other right inside the house. The area around the indoor pool was decorated like a beach. White sand, palm trees, sun loungers. Julian and Vicky often spent time here. While the girls swam in the pool, Julian, lounging on a comfortable sunbed, watched her. The man told Vicky that he admired her graceful movements and sculpted figure. The girl was pleased to hear this. During these meetings, which happened regularly, sometimes once a week, sometimes twice, there was no one in the house, not even servants. Vicky enjoyed the closeness of her beloved and the luxury surrounding them, without regard for anyone else. Of course, Vicky understood perfectly well that she was just Julian's mistress. The man had repeatedly emphasized how important his family was to him. And at the same time, he looked at her like that. Her presence made him happy. Vicky knew this for sure. Everything else was not important to her for now. "You're probably judging me?" Vicky asked her attentive listener, lowering her gaze. "It's just that it all sounds... But you see, I knew Julian was married, and I still agreed to this relationship. And with joy." "Not at all, honestly," George replied. "You're just a young girl, and he's an adult, married man, owner of a large business. He's the one to blame for this. As a man, as the older one. Perhaps you're right. But back then, I didn't blame Julian for anything. On the contrary, I felt sorry for him. I saw that he loved me. At least, it seemed so to me. But I understood that Julian couldn't leave his wife and children. His relatives wouldn't understand or support him. Julian had said many times how important the opinion of elders and relatives was to them. They would never forgive him for such an act. And that's why I felt sorry for him. And I loved him very, very much. One day Julian told everyone he was going on a business trip. In reality, he decided to arrange a vacation for himself and his young mistress. They jetted off to Thailand, They went from the cold February straight into a hot, sunny summer. Winter was coming to an end and had already become quite tiresome. Snow, frost, slush. And suddenly, just a few hours on a plane, and Vicky, along with her beloved, found herself in a summer fairy tale. Luxurious beaches, mesmerizing views, warm turquoise water. Vicky and Julian could finally appear openly together everywhere, in restaurants, at discos, and simply on the streets of the resort town. They looked magnificent. Vicky knew it. Handsome, masculine Julian and she, fragile, happy, tanned. Julian openly put his arm around her waist, held her hand, and even kissed her. For the first time, they weren't hiding. These were indescribable feelings. Vicky had never felt so happy. In Julian's strong, reliable embrace, she forgot everything. Even the fact that her beloved man was married, and soon they would return home, where Vicky would again have to be content with rare meetings and feel like just a mistress. Deep down, the girl harbored hope. Hope that Julian would eventually leave his wife for her. It sometimes happens. Why shouldn't this miracle happen to them? Only something had to happen that would help Julian decide on a desperate step. There, in Thailand, the man once opened up to Vicky. They were returning from the beach then. It was already late at night. Julian and Vicky loved swimming in the dark when there were few people on the beaches, and so they often returned to the hotel after midnight. And now they were walking along the water's edge. Water dripped from Vicky's long, wavy hair. She hadn't had time to dry it with a towel. To be precise, she simply didn't. Julian once confessed that he adored watching her wet hair. That's how Vicky reminded him of a beautiful mermaid. So the girl tried for him. The moon shone brightly in the sky. It was somehow unusual here, too large, naturally yellow, as if painted. A fantastic sight. Muffled music came from somewhere near the pier. Probably a disco had started at the bar. "What are you dreaming about?" Julian asked his companion thoughtfully. Vicky thought. Tell the truth? Admit that she only dreamed of falling asleep and waking up in Julian's arms, making him breakfast, seeing him off to work, ironing his shirts? Wouldn't that sound too boring? What if Julian considered her clingy? No, Vicky couldn't allow that. I dream of traveling a lot. Traveling around Europe, visiting some exotic countries, seeing with my own eyes what I'd only heard about before. A wonderful desire, Julian approved. I'll help you fulfill it. I quite like the idea myself. And you? What are you dreaming about? Vicky asked in return. The answer stunned the girl. I dream of a son, Julian confessed. More than anything in the world. I want to have a son. But my wife and I only have daughters. I adore them. My daughters are my life. I'm proud of them. I love them. But I keep dreaming of an heir. I would never have thought that. Why? Julian smiled. I thought you dreamed of opening a new chain of restaurants, starting some new business, building an empire. Oh yes, many people think so. Nobody imagines that more than anything in the world I dream of a son, a continuation of my lineage. I've already thought of a name for him. Sometimes I look at toys in the boys' sections. And then I go to the pink shelves with dolls to please my daughters. You sound like a wonderful father, Vicky sighed and thought about her own father. He never bought dolls for her or her sister. What about dolls? The indifferent father couldn't even say for sure what grade his daughter was in or when their birthdays were. Vicky thought a lot about that conversation on the shore later, and gradually a decision formed in her mind. A bold one, perhaps even reckless. She would fulfill her beloved man's dream. She would bear him a son, as handsome and smart as Julian himself. At first, the girl herself was frightened by her thoughts. Julian had told her directly that he wasn't going to leave his wife and children. Would he be happy about the news of a child on the side? This was very serious after all. But one day Vicky saw how tenderly Julian treated a little boy, a child of visitors to his restaurant. The baby looked about 3 or 4 years old. He was fussy, sitting in his high chair. He was probably bored, like any child. The little boy wanted to run, have fun, make noise. Julian, who had popped into the restaurant for a minute, noticed this scene. He walked up to the child, shook his hand like an adult, started a conversation with him, and the little one immediately calmed down, as if he had grown up right before their eyes. "You are lucky parents," he said to the visitors. "You have a wonderful son growing up, a real man." "Yes, well," the boy's mother smiled skeptically. Her whole demeanor suggested that she certainly didn't consider herself a happy parent. But Vicky, who had now finished her internship and was working as a waitress at the restaurant, she had managed to notice everything. Julian's tender look at the child, his warm smile. It seemed he really did dream of a son. This episode helped Vicky decide. She realized it was time to move from planning to action. The girl simply stopped taking her pills. And also, she scoured the internet looking for a way to conceive specifically a boy. These methods seemed somehow too unreliable, perhaps. Vicky needed guarantees, and so she turned to Hope, her older sister, who had graduated from medical academy and certainly knew about such things. "You have strange interests," Hope said, surprised, hearing her sister's question. "Nothing strange. There's a waitress at work. Her name is Olivia. She and her husband are planning a second child. Their eldest is a daughter. Now they want a son. Is there a way to arrange that?" "Well, there is one option," Hope replied. "True, it's not particularly reliable, but it increases the chances of conceiving a child of the desired sex. Although, I repeat, it's a very complex process. And by the way, a lot depends on the man's physiology here. But all right, I'll write down a calculation scheme for your Olivia for the right days. Let them try with her husband, you never know." And Vicky, of course, used this scheme. Everything worked out immediately, on the very first try. 2 weeks after the romantic evening, Vicky realized she was expecting a child. The discovery both delighted and frightened her. But there was no turning back. The girl didn't tell Julian anything. She wanted to find out the baby's sex herself first, and then surprise him. Circumstances also aligned very favorably. The man had flown to Armenia with his family for several months. Vicky missed her beloved and at the same time enjoyed her new condition. It was amazing to realize that a child was living inside her. Not just a child, her and Julian's baby. They would have a son. Vicky had almost no doubt that she was carrying a boy. She felt it. Vicky didn't tell her relatives about her pregnancy, and nobody was interested anyway. Her mother lived her own life. Her father had completely disappeared from the horizon. Hope had been renting an apartment in the city center for a long time, closer to work. The sisters didn't communicate much during that period. At the appointed time, Vicky went for an ultrasound. With a pounding heart, she waited for the specialist's verdict. "You're having a boy," said the strict woman in glasses, moving the sensor over Vicky's belly, which was just beginning to round out. "A healthy, strong boy. Congratulations." Vicky flew home on wings then. That very day, Hope came to visit them and immediately understood everything. Her sister always had a sharp eye. "Are you pregnant?" she asked quietly when their mother went into the kitchen. "Yes," Vicky nodded, not even trying to hide her smile. "I'm having a son soon." "Who is his father?" "The best man in the world." "And where is he? Why aren't you with him yet? How are you planning to raise the child?" "His father," Vicky said dreamily. "He's just not in the country right now, and telling him such news over the phone isn't really ideal. I'll wait for him to come back, and everything will be sorted out. Just don't tell Mom yet, or she'll drive me crazy. Whatever you think best, Hope shrugged. If you need help, ask. I can't promise much, but I'll help however I can. Thank you very much. Their mother still managed to wear out her pregnant daughter's nerves. When her belly could no longer be hidden, she noticed and understood everything. How her mother screamed at Vicky then, called her terrible names, threatened her with a hard fate. Then she softened a little, started probing for information about the baby's father. Vicky told her mother the truth, but she didn't believe a single word her daughter said. She decided that Vicky had gotten pregnant by some good-for-nothing and was now inventing stories to justify herself. Now her mother often sighed about her hard fate, complaining that soon her ungrateful daughter would burden her with a freeloader. The girl clenched her teeth to avoid getting into useless arguments with her parent and waited for her beloved's return. The day Julian flew back from Armenia was snowy and cold. January was ending. A long February lay ahead. And after that, already in March, in the first spring days, a wonderful baby would be born, Julian's long-awaited son. Julian himself called Vicky, said he missed her very much, and was dreaming of seeing her. As usual, he sent a car for her, which brought Vicky to the already familiar country house. The man opened the door himself. He was smiling, warmly and very kindly. Vicky simply adored his smile. But very soon this self-charming smile slid off the man's face. Julian saw Vicky's belly, which could no longer be hidden. What is this?" he asked with something close to disgust. "Julian, I didn't want to tell you this over the phone. I dreamed of telling you in person. We're having a son soon. A son, Julian. Can you imagine? Your dream will finally come true." The man sank wearily into an armchair. It was as if he had aged in an instant. From him. It was as if icy cold radiated from him. It was so unusual that Vicky was confused and scared. The girl, of course, understood that Julian would be very surprised, but he looked as if he had just learned about some annoying problem. What about his talks about a son? Julian had dreamed of him so much. "Aren't you happy?" Vicky finally dared to ask. Julian cast his eyes on her. They looked somehow very tired. "Go home," the man said calmly. "Go. I need to think things over. I'll tell you what to do later." Julian called a taxi himself. Vicky held it together in the house. But in the car, she let the tears flow. A loving person wouldn't have acted like Julian. They hadn't seen each other for several months, and he had sent her away, practically kicked her out. Julian didn't love her. Before, Vicky felt like a beautiful princess next to this man. Now Julian treated her like some unwanted object. There wasn't a drop of love or joy in his eyes, only irritation and anger. How could this be? Had he been pretending all this time? Had he just been using her beauty and youth? Vicky didn't want to go home. Her mother was there with her complaints. By the way, her parent turned out to be right after all. It seemed Vicky would indeed have to raise the baby alone. The child? Thoughts of him restored Vicky's composure. Soon her son would be born, a dear, loved person. He needed a strong, sensible mother, and that meant Vicky would be one. Thinking of her little boy, the girl smiled through her tears. Life no longer seemed hopeless. Well, let Julian not be by her side. But Vicky would become a mother very soon. Even the anticipation of meeting her little one was happiness. And when she held him in her arms, then she would be able to handle anything. Vicky asked the driver to take her to Hope's. She could tell Hope everything. Her sister, she was so smart, so kind. Of course, her sister would help her, and Hope did help. She listened, she sympathized. Then she went into the living room and pulled out the sofa bed. "This will be your bed," she explained. "Stay with me for now. Mom really won't leave you alone. and you mustn't get stressed now." For a while, Vicky felt safe. She was calm and at ease. Hope supported her sister in every way, buying her vitamins and healthy food. "I want my nephew to be born healthy," the older sister smiled. This warmed Vicky's heart. She was pleased that someone else, besides herself, was waiting for the baby and even caring. And then one day Julian showed up. He didn't send a car for Vicky. He came himself. The girl was just returning from the store. The man was waiting for her in his car near the entrance. "Hi," he opened the driver's door. Julian was smiling again. Only now Vicky didn't trust that smile. "Hi," the girl greeted him cautiously. "Get in the car. We need to talk." Vicky settled in beside him, the man she still loved. She again felt his scent and saw his black, beautiful eyes up close. That familiar pleasant chill appeared in her stomach, a usual sensation. "How are you?" the man inquired. "Everything all right? How are you feeling? How's the baby?" Was he interested in her condition? Did he care? Vicky didn't know how to react to this. Hope stirred in her soul. Maybe that day the man was just thrown off balance by the news, and now he had thought it all over, realized he was wrong, and was ready to make amends. "Everything's fine, with me and with my son." "That's wonderful. I have a question for you. You don't think you can raise him yourself alone?" "If that's how it turned out, then I can," Vicky stated confidently. "Oh, come on," Julian smirked. "You don't really have an education or a job. You won't be able to go back to work for 3 years. And even then, people aren't exactly eager to hire a mother with a small child. Children get sick, moms take sick leave. Who needs that?" Vicky still couldn't understand what Julian was getting at, and he continued. "You practically don't have a father, and your mother isn't much help either. She lives poorly, and your relationship isn't the most trusting. I know all this. All hope is on your sister. But she won't babysit you forever, and it's unfair to burden a young woman with your problems. She needs to build her own life." Vicky was hurt by these words. The most terrible thing was that every single one of them was the pure truth. "Why are you telling me all this?" the girl asked, her voice trembling with rising tears. "I'm just outlining your situation, to offer you a way out. A real way out." And Julian finally revealed his plan to Vicky. Monstrous and inhuman. He offered me to give the child to him," the girl said quietly, looking directly into George's eyes. It was clearly difficult for Vicky to talk about this. George patted her shoulder encouragingly. "Well, I'll be. What a scoundrel this Julian is. Poor girl." Julian said he had indeed always dreamed of a son. With his wife, he had 3 daughters. It turned out Julian also had 2 illegitimate daughters. He had already decided it was his blood or genes. And then suddenly Vicky informs him she's expecting a son. At first, upon learning of his mistress's pregnancy, the man was angry. These were unnecessary problems that he didn't need at all. But then he thought about it and felt joy in his soul. Finally, he would have a son. Julian had always dreamed of a brilliant future for his heir. He had so many plans for this baby. And if the son grew up with a single mother, he would hardly become a decent man. No, Julian could not allow that. "I'll take him from you. I'll take him into my family. I've already talked to my wife. She's now pretending to be pregnant. We'll tell everyone he's ours, mine and my wife's." "No." Vicky shook her head in horror and placed her hand on her belly, as if shielding the baby. "No, this will be better for everyone," Julian continued. "I'll help you with a job, with an apartment. You'll live a free life, find a rich husband. I know that's what you dream of. With a child on your hands, that's unlikely to happen. The boy will grow up in decent conditions. I'll give him everything. You won't be able to provide this child with even a small part of what I can give him." Julian's gaze was almost pleading. At that moment, Vicky felt her power over this strong man. Perhaps because of this, she mistakenly thought she could decide something in this strange situation, could make a choice. No, the girl repeated. She couldn't part with her little one. Vicky had waited for him so much, thought about him so much. She already loved her son, loved him with all her soul, with all her heart. And give him to Julian? No way. Never. Think about it anyway, Julian asked finally. I'll call you later. There's nothing to think about. No, Vicky said, and got out of the car. She blocked Julian's number then so as not to get upset or worried unnecessarily. At home, Vicky told Hope everything. Her sister's face took on a worried expression. This is bad. Very bad, she said. People like Julian are used to getting their way. You need to be on your guard. Her sister was right. Julian didn't back down. About a week after that conversation in Julian's car, Vicky was almost kidnapped. They tried to drag her into a van with mud-splattered license plates right on the street. The girl was so scared then. She couldn't resist the strength of the man pulling her towards the open door. The girl was saved by chance. A police car appeared at the beginning of the street. The would-be kidnapper pushed Vicky away, jumped into the car, and sped off. She sat down right in a snowdrift because her legs suddenly weakened and refused to obey her. Learning what had happened, Hope became seriously alarmed. He won't stop. Her sister shook her head. Just then, the phone rang. Someone was calling Hope's phone. The girl answered, and then handed the receiver to Vicky. Strange, but it's for you. Well, hello, Julian's voice sounded in the receiver. Alien, cold, harsh. Was it really him who had called her a beauty, a queen, a miracle just recently? Please stop harassing me, Vicky pleaded. I beg you, leave me alone. I will, as soon as I get my son. You can be free. A car will come for you today. Be ready by 8 in the evening. Someone will take you to a private clinic. You'll give birth there. They'll take the child, and you'll be sent home. With compensation, of course. Vicky couldn't believe this was happening in reality. Julian turned out to be not a fairy tale prince at all, but an evil, cruel man. And now, it seemed, there was no escape from him. He had money, connections, his people throughout the city's infrastructure. How could she resist him, a man who was used to being able to buy anything? And now he was offering her money for her little one. Unfathomable. Well, what a man! George couldn't help himself. Emotions overwhelmed him. It's my own fault. Vicky lowered her eyes. I wanted a beautiful life, and I got myself into this mess. You shouldn't blame yourself. George tried to make his voice sound as gentle as possible. You were just a young, inexperienced girl, and you fell in love with that scoundrel. You were just unlucky. Vicky took a deep breath and continued her story. Hope called me a taxi at 6 in the evening, 2 hours before the time Julian had set. She booked me a hotel room in the next town. She said I couldn't give up here if I wanted to protect my child. Hope, as always, had a clear plan. The older sister said that Vicky needed to hold out until the birth. There was only a little time left, just over a month. And then it was important to manage to register the baby as her own. Once Vicky was officially recognized as the mother and the child was registered, Julian wouldn't be able to do anything. However, there were many difficulties with this plan. Firstly, hiding from a man like Julian, even for a few weeks, was problematic. A hotel wasn't such a reliable place. To check in there, you needed a passport. Vicky's details would surely show up in some database. But there was no other way out. She couldn't spend the night on the street. And the sisters didn't have any acquaintances willing to shelter Vicky for a few weeks. Secondly, the birth itself. As soon as Vicky went to the maternity hospital, Julian would immediately find out about it. He would surely be monitoring such clinics, knowing that Vicky would have to seek help sooner or later. But Hope will help me with that, Vicky smiled. She came up with a solution. She has a midwife friend who, when the time comes, will deliver my baby. This woman has a whole room set up in her apartment for such events, so Julian won't find out anything. And so the sisters' plan took shape. Vicky would go to the next town and live in a hotel until a certain time. When the time came, Hope would come for her, and they would go together to that midwife. Then Vicky would have to stay in the hotel for some more time, because processing the baby's documents wasn't a quick process. Well, and after Vicky had the baby's birth certificate in her hands, she could safely return. But nothing worked out. Vicky shook her head. Hope called me a taxi. The driver took me to another town. But on the way, it turned out we were being followed. A black SUV with tinted windows followed the taxi relentlessly. The driver noticed it. He weaved, trying to shake it off, but the car didn't fall behind. And then the man got worried. Did you do something? He inquired of his passenger. Why are they following us? No, I didn't do anything, honestly, Vicky replied. I don't like this. I don't need problems. The taxi drove onto the country highway, an empty, snowy road. The pursuit continued here, too. This won't do, the increasingly nervous taxi driver said. He floored the gas pedal and sped forward at high speed. Having shaken off the SUV, the driver braked and opened the door. Get out. I have enough for the fare. I won't take money from you, even though I drove you well. Deal with your problems yourself. But where will I go? Vicky was horrified. A deserted road, frost, darkness, and that terrible SUV is about to appear. I have no idea. Wait for that car that's following us. They're looking for you, so they definitely won't leave you on the road. They won't drive past. And I have to go. Saying this, the driver slammed the door and sped off. Almost at the same moment, headlights appeared in the distance. It was probably that same SUV catching up with the taxi. Vicky barely managed to hide behind a large snowdrift. The black, menacing car sped past. The taxi driver's calculation was wrong. They continued to pursue him, thinking the passenger was still on board. Well, that's pretty much it, Vicky sighed. I found myself alone on that highway. So I walked back, towards the city. I wasn't going to freeze on the roadside. And then you found me. Just like that. The story is puzzling, George said slowly. But what should we do with you now? How can I help you? Vicky shrugged. Here's what, George declared decisively. You need to rest now. Lie down right here, in the kitchen, near the stove, on this sofa. I'll get you a pillow and blanket now. Vicky's eyes lit up with joy. It was clear that she was very tired and cold. Besides, she had gone through such stress. The thought of leaving the warm, cozy house sent her into a panic. Of course, it's true. How else? We'll think about how to help you tomorrow. Morning is wiser than evening. Thank you, the girl exclaimed. You're welcome, George replied with a smile. And you, don't be afraid of anything. They definitely won't look for you here. Vicky fell asleep instantly. It was understandable. She had been through so much that evening. Not everyone could handle it. George carefully closed the kitchen door, put on his padded jacket, slipped his feet into his felt boots, and went out onto the porch to smoke. Yes, the girl's situation was difficult. He had to help. George looked at the bright stars and tried to figure out how to save Vicky. The difficulty was that he couldn't go to the police. It seemed this Julian had everything covered there. Gradually, a quite good plan formed in the man's head. In the morning, George got up early to prepare breakfast. He himself was used to coffee and a sandwich in the mornings, but today he had a guest, and a pregnant one at that. She needed a proper meal. So George made scrambled eggs with chicken and tomatoes. Vicky eagerly attacked the breakfast and swallowed everything in an instant. "Thank you. It was incredibly delicious." She sincerely thanked him. "You're doing so much for me." "I was thinking about your situation yesterday," George began the serious conversation, "and I decided, why go to a hotel where they can find you so easily? Stay with me. They won't look for you here. I'll tell the villagers you're my niece. They know her, our Sally. She used to visit us often when she was a teenager. And you look very much like her, so no questions will arise. But I can't. I feel awkward putting you out like this." "Stop with that nonsense," George interrupted the girl. "It's no trouble at all for me. And helping someone in such a situation is normal, isn't it? So live here as long as you need. And you can stay with the baby here too afterwards, until you get his documents sorted out." "Thank you." Vicky threw her arms around the embarrassed George. "Sally, if anyone asks, your name is Sally," the elderly man reminded her with a smile. "Yes, I'll remember. And can I call Hope from your phone? I'm just afraid my number is being tapped. I'll tell her how I am, she's worried." "Of course." George handed Vicky his mobile phone. And a completely new kind of life began in the little village house. Vicky slept a lot at first. George understood that the young girl's body was fighting stress this way, and tried not to bother her unnecessarily. The man told the neighbors that his niece Sarah had come to visit. She had recently gotten married, was expecting a child, and her husband was trying to finish renovations before the heir was born. So they sent Sally to her uncle in the village for fresh air, so she wouldn't breathe paint fumes. The version didn't cause any questions or surprise from anyone. Only Peter clearly suspected something, but kept his suspicions to himself. Vicky spoke little, sometimes talking about her life before everything happened. It seemed that she was, essentially, a child nobody needed. Only Hope, her older sister, cared about her, and also Grandpa George. But he died young. The girl sometimes called Hope from George's phone. They talked about something in hushed tones. George tried to go to the back rooms at this time so as not to make his guest uncomfortable with his presence. In gratitude for the shelter, Vicky tried to help George with chores. She would wash dishes or wipe away dust. And one day she decided to bake a pie. But nothing worked out. The dough was raw inside, burned outside, and the filling was completely oversalted. "Well, I just ruined the ingredients," Vicky lamented. "It's nothing serious. You're still young," George chuckled. And he thought to himself that a culinary college graduate should probably be able to cook such simple things. But maybe Vicky still hadn't recovered from everything that had happened to her recently. After all, she had gone through truly terrible things. And nothing was over yet. The most crucial and dangerous part of the plan was still ahead. George felt sorry for the young girl who had gotten into such a mess due to her inexperience. He understood perfectly well that Vicky was simply looking for love and protection. Everything she hadn't seen from her utterly indifferent and cold parents. That's why she fell in love with this Julian, who was twice her age. Vicky. She was almost a child, just a little older than his, George's, granddaughter. Only Allie was loved and spoiled. But this girl was essentially abandoned to her fate. At least her sister was reliable. It was a shame Hope couldn't come here to visit Vicky. Her visit would have cheered the girl up. But Julian's people could very well be watching Hope, which is why the sisters preferred to communicate from a distance. George sometimes thought about what would have happened to Vicky if he hadn't met her accidentally on the road that night. She would surely have frozen on the way to the city, or Julian would have caught up with her. In any case, the girl was very, very lucky that night. Sometimes in the evenings, Vicky's belly would ache. She would hold it with her hands and listen, calculating something. George understood. The hour of birth was approaching. Sometimes he became scared. What if everything started right in his house? What would he do then? He could, of course, call the neighbor. Old Martha used to work as an orderly in the maternity ward. But when was that? George became more and more anxious with each passing day. One evening, heartily eating the dinner George had prepared, Vicky told her hospitable host the news. "It's time," she said. "What?" George didn't understand. "It's time for me to go to the city, to that midwife I found. She's been warned and is waiting for me. The baby wants to come out. The time is approaching, and he's kicking as if he's cramped in there." Well, well, George scratched the back of his head. "So a new person will appear soon. I've lived so many years, and it's still a miracle and a mystery to me." "I can't believe it either," Vicky admitted. "And honestly, I'm very afraid of the birth itself. But Hope says I'm like on a submarine. There's nowhere to go." "So, how will you get there?" "Hope will call me a taxi. The day after tomorrow evening, I'll leave. Maybe for a day, maybe for a couple of days, however it works out. Then I'll need to stay somewhere with the baby for a while they process the documents and all that." Of course, George understood her doubts. "We agreed. You'll come back here with the baby. But we need to prepare for the baby's arrival, right? What about a crib, stroller, clothes, formula, diapers?" "Hope has already prepared everything. I'll come back with the baby and the things." Vicky smiled. "Everything will be fine." "You're lucky with your sister," George approved. "She's a good one. You can tell right away." "Yes, that's true," Vicky agreed. "I can't imagine what I'd do without her. Or without you." That evening, George went to visit Peter and Mary. The occasion was joyful. Sergei, their younger son, had earned a scientific degree. The guy had worked towards his goal for a long time and finally reached it. The old friends sat up late, reminiscing about their youth, funny stories from their lives. As always, they talked about Helen. Peter and Mary missed her very much too. Closer to midnight, George headed home. He opened the door quietly, so as not to accidentally wake Vicky. She, of course, had been asleep for a long time. But barely entering the hallway, George heard the girl's voice. She was speaking loudly and clearly, as she thought she was home alone. "Tomorrow I'll come for the baby. Will he be with you already?" "No. I need to know for sure. We need to act carefully here." "Yes, he agrees. I'll stay with the infant here for a while. I'll have to look after him. It's not easy. So I want to get 50%, not 30. You're risking more, but I'm not on vacation either. I'll have to deal with the little brat. Don't forget." George was stunned by what he had just heard. The first thing that struck his ear was the phrase, "little brat." Vicky had spoken so tenderly about the son who was about to be born. And then suddenly this, "It's a dangerous scheme, but we've calculated everything. Our plan mustn't fail. Everything is thought out to the smallest detail." Vicky kept saying something strange, incomprehensible. What scheme? What plan? What risk? George began to suspect that Vicky was not at all who she pretended to be. The man was all ears. He needed to get as much information as possible. Only then would he understand what to do next. "Let's go over the details again," Vicky continued. "You sneak into the maternity hospital disguised as an orderly and take the baby. You give him a sedative so he doesn't cry. You bring him to your place. I'll be waiting there. I take the little one. Come back here. Pretend to be an ecstatic, inexperienced mother. Meanwhile, you contact the family and demand money. As soon as we get the money, we leave the boy at the train station and we fly to Europe. With that kind of cash, no one will find us." George was stunned. Vicky, without realizing it, had just revealed her plan to him. Some things were still unclear, but the man grasped the essence. It seemed Vicky was only pretending to be pregnant. She was planning with someone to take someone else's baby from the maternity hospital in order to get money, and they were using his George's house as a place to hide for a while. In the old village dwelling, Vicky and the child really wouldn't be looked for. It wouldn't occur to anyone. The perpetrators probably learned about the lonely, kind widower from someone and invented this detective story. They portrayed Vicky as a victim hiding from an evil, influential former lover who wanted to take her child. In reality, they were the ones planning to take the newborn. George stood by the door, listening to Vicky's unusually harsh, cold voice, and frantically thought about what he should do next. He probably needed to turn around, quietly slip out of the house, and go back to Peter's. Together they would find a way out. And now he had to run, before Vicky noticed that her conversation had been overheard, because otherwise, everything was lost. Without turning, walking backward, George went out the door. Vicky didn't understand anything. The man ran as fast as he could towards his old friend's house. Peter and Mary listened to him carefully, without interrupting. "Why didn't you tell me right away?" Peter wondered. "That's why I thought that girl didn't look so much like your Sally. I was afraid you'd accidentally let something slip. And she told me she was in danger." "Well, I'll be," Mary said slowly, shaking her head. "You sheltered a bandit." "She's a magnificent actress," George sighed. "If it weren't for that accidentally overheard conversation, I would never have guessed." "We need to save the baby," Peter declared. "The one they're planning to take. Newborns are so fragile. Who knows what that girl might do to him, even if not out of malice. The baby shouldn't fall into such hands." "I know. But how do we save him?" George looked at his friends. "I don't know what to do. Which maternity hospital is this baby in? Who is Vicky's accomplice? We don't know anything. Even the city where they plan to pull this off is unknown." "We need to go to Officer Stone," Mary suddenly realized. Officer Stone was the local district policeman. Honest, brave, decisive, with a strong sense of justice. He would definitely know what to do. They didn't wait for morning. They went to the station right away at night. Fortunately, Officer Stone was on duty. Peter knew about this. He had met him near the store the day before. They talked, and the district policeman said he was working the night shift. Officer Stone was very surprised to see the procession of old friends at his doorstep. "What brings you here? Did something happen?" "Something happened," Peter answered for everyone. George stepped forward and began his long story. The district policeman didn't interrupt. He listened attentively, thoughtfully, asking questions from time to time. "Quite a trendy story," he said when George finished. "I'll contact my colleagues in the city, get some advice. And you all go home, so as not to arouse suspicion. You, George, act as usual. And in the morning it's best to make up some excuse and go to Peter's. Stay there for the day. If I've understood correctly, this is a serious crime." The next morning, George made breakfast for himself and Vicky as usual. The girl chirped cheerfully, talking about her dream. George tried to smile so as not to arouse suspicion. But it was very difficult. Vicky stroked her fake belly, talked to the non-existent baby. Liar. How utterly false, insincere, unpleasant she was, like a nasty toad. And how had George not noticed this before? "I'm going to Peter's," he told Vicky. "For the whole day. I need to fix the barn roof. You don't get bored here. Lunch is in the fridge. I'll probably be back for dinner." "Of course," Vicky smiled radiantly. "And I'll get ready, because tomorrow Hope's taxi will come for me. I can't even believe I'll meet my son in just a couple of days. It's exciting, of course." George forced a smile and hurried to Peter's. He couldn't stay under the same roof with that person any longer. George spent the whole day at Peter and Mary's. They discussed what was happening, speculated on how events would unfold next. It was easier to get through this strange story with old friends. Late in the evening, Officer Stone appeared at Peter's house. Tired but cheerful, in a clearly elevated mood. "Well, old bandits, the crime is solved. We caught those criminals, and we also nabbed someone else along the way." Mary gestured for the men to the round table in the center of the living room. When everyone was settled, Officer Stone recounted the incredible story. Vicky turned out not to be Vicky at all. The girl's real name was Susan. Of everything she had told George about herself, only her love for money was true. Sue had dreamed of getting rich since childhood, but she chose a path that wasn't the most righteous. In her teenage years, the girl engaged in shoplifting in supermarkets, got caught a few times, but there was no serious punishment. Then a bigger case happened. Susan participated in a car theft. And here she was lucky. The guy, her accomplice, took all the blame. Apparently, he had feelings for the young, pretty girl. Susan tried to work. Sometimes she got a job as a saleswoman in a shopping center. Sometimes she sat at the reception of a fitness center. But very soon, the girl realized that you couldn't get rich quickly through honest means. One day in a nightclub, Susan accidentally met an adventurer just like herself. Paula was several years older and much more experienced. It was she who offered her new friend an excellent scheme, at first glance. Paula worked as an orderly in the best maternity hospital in the city. There was a paid ward for particularly important persons. It resembled an expensive resort. Luxurious interiors, high-tech equipment, impeccably polite staff. In this ward, the wife of a prominent businessman, a well-known figure in the city, was staying for observation, and legends circulated about his fortune. Paula knew that the child his wife was carrying was long awaited and hard won. The couple had struggled to conceive for a long time, and finally, a miracle happened, which they had almost given up hope for. However, the pregnancy turned out to be problematic. The expectant mother often had to stay in the hospital. The staff knew the story of this family, and Paula, of course, did too. The cunning plan had been brewing in the girl's mind for a long time. It was so simple. Take the baby from the nursery. Nothing difficult for a maternity hospital employee. And then the parents, frantic with worry, would pay any money for him. But for such a job, an accomplice was needed, a loyal person, ready for risk and hardship. And Sue, her new acquaintance, was perfect for this role. Together, the girls thought through the details of the plan. And they learned about George, the widower from the distant village, completely by chance from Alice, the man's granddaughter, Officer Stone said. She was telling her friends about her grandpa in a cafe, saying how he missed her grandma, describing his kindness. And Paula and Susan, sitting at the next table, heard it all. Such an absolutely incredible coincidence. The cunning girls first scouted the situation, making sure that a lonely widower indeed lived in the old village house. The perpetrators got down to business. They staged the scene for you with the pregnant girl walking along the road. Officer Stone shook his head. And you fell for it. Then she fed you more lies. She's probably a good actress, that girl. You didn't suspect anything? I didn't even have a thought, George agreed. I felt sorry for her. She looked unhappy, lost. And we picked up that girl from you. Officer Stone continued telling the story. The other day, as if for a document check, some unfamiliar girl appeared in the village. She's been living here for a month. According to witnesses, that lady's belly turned out to be fake. We ran her documents through the database, and it turned out she was wanted for damaging property. She punctured someone's tires out of spite. And she had been brought in for various minor offenses before. And then we got to this story with the child. The girl is frail. She immediately gave up her friend. And we caught her red-handed at the maternity hospital when she was carrying the infant out the gate. That's where we apprehended her. So there you have it. Just like in a movie, Mary exclaimed, throwing up her hands. Peter and George sat in silence, unable to utter a word. It wasn't easy, that's for sure. But no time for tea. I need to get back to the station. I just dropped by for a minute to tell you everything, and I've got tons of work, writing reports and statements. By the way, George, I'll officially summon you tomorrow. Your testimony is needed. All right. The elderly man nodded. He needed time to come to terms with what had happened. It was hard to process. He had become so attached to Vicky, so moved by her story. He felt sorry for the poor, confused girl whose head had been messed up by an older lover. And now it turned out there was no Julian at all. She told me such a convincing story about an older lover, described him in such detail. Julian, Officer Stone clarified, is a real person. She did try to reel him in, and she succeeded. After all, she's a young, pretty girl. The cunning lady managed to take lots of photos and videos of their dates, and then she extorted money from Julian. He paid her. He didn't want everything to become known to his wife, relatives, business partners. And besides, such a reputation was no good for him. This man eventually did go to the police. Well, what a girl! Mary shook her head in surprise. A devil in a skirt. By the way, that businessman whose baby they wanted to take, he's very grateful to you, George. Says he'll definitely contact you and shake your hand personally. And not just shake it, I imagine. He'll clearly show up with a gift. George felt embarrassed and awkward at these words. What had he done that was so special? He just accidentally overheard a conversation and reported it to the police. It was they, the police, who had done a good job. If anyone deserved a reward, it was them. Officer Stone left. Mary went to the kitchen, started clattering pots and pans there. Calming, familiar sounds. Peter and George remained at the table. Yes, Peter said. Well, I suppose you won't trust anyone at all after what happened. Why? George was surprised. If such a situation happened again, I would do the same. It's better to get burned than leave someone in such trouble. You're an amazing person, Peter said slowly. Well, how about fishing tomorrow morning? That's a good idea, George approved.